morning to everybody. Hi, I'm Susan Sano. I am the Senior Manager for Volunteer Management Education, and I just want to welcome you to Volunteer Fairfax's program that officially kicks off our Martin Luther King Jr. holiday festivities, observances, and actions. On Monday, thousands of Americans are inspired to come together to serve their community during this holiday. And did you know that this is the only federal holiday observed as a national day of service, a day on, not a day off? This marks the fourth year in a row as part of our commitment to observing this holiday with service. We continue to bring the community together to address issues pledged by Dr. King during his lifetime. I want to begin by saying, say my hello, of course, sorry about that, and want to thank our many sponsors from our community. It's amazing how many groups have stepped forward and recognized the importance of these kinds of activities. Today's program as well as Monday, I just wanted to thank them for stepping up and making a difference, and to be able to provide programs like this and on Monday for free. I do want to give a special thanks to ITC Federal. Chris Watkins is here with us today. And Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. Make sure you unmute and say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Susan, for that kind introduction. I bring you greetings from our CEO, Mr. Greg Fitzgerald, our leadership team, and over 1,500 staff who make up ITC Federal. We thank Volunteer Fairfax for the opportunity to support and honor the work, life, and legacy of one of this nation's most impactful citizens, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., through this weekend's events. As a mid-sized technology firm, our teams work with federal agencies to deliver missions critical to the lives of this nation's citizens. Our success is possible because of our commitment to bringing together a creative and talented workforce that represents King's dream. Our focus on equity and inclusiveness in the workplace is a key cultural pillar at ITC, and it is rooted in our policies and systems. Currently, the diversity of our team's racial makeup is 20% above industry benchmarks. And additionally, 14% of our entire workforce consists of disabled veterans, while 50% of our senior leadership team is composed of women. Having many voices from various backgrounds fosters our innovation and creativity to deliver successfully on our customers' mission. At ITC, community and relationship building is at the core of everything we do. This extends to our dedication to giving back to local communities like Fairfax through service, volunteering, and philanthropy. Community conversations like these allow us to sit at King's table of brotherhood and make the choice to walk in the light of creative altruism to accelerate, transform, and deliver on brighter tomorrows. We look forward to today's discussion and the upcoming events during this MLK weekend, and we are honored to be a supporter of this event. Thank you, Susan.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Excellent. I just want to go over some of the ground rules for the program today, reminding people that this is a brave space. We respect speakers, all of our speakers and the participants. This is a time when we are learning. We have stepped out of our comfort zone, and we may use an incorrect word. We may unintentionally say something. We're going to ask people to be called in, not called out. Our goals are to become better, educated allies. Should something today cause you cause a reaction, some pain, please take a sacred pause. Take notice that you are having this kind of reaction. We want you to take a step back to reflect. Ask yourself, what is the root of the reaction? Find your breath. Get your breath to a natural rhythmic level and scan your body. What is your body trying to tell you? And how would you like to respond? Natasha Harrison, our keynote speaker for today, helped me with this language. So I want to acknowledge and thank her for getting us to a place where we can do this work. If you have questions for today's speakers, for the panelists, for our keynote speaker, you can ask that in the Q&A area. We have people monitoring that area, and what we're going to do is look at questions and figure out how to combine them if need so, or edit them for clarity, or to ask them at the proper time. If you want to speak to other of the participants, that's what the chat area is for, and you can speak to each other there and pose questions. We'll be monitoring that as well. So with this, I want to bring on the star of the show, is Natasha Harrison. Natasha is the founder of Community Build Ventures. It's a pro-Black solution-focused firm. They're firmly committed to eliminating racial disparities by developing powerful, impactful, and racial equity-driven leaders and organizations. Somebody asked me yesterday, how did you find her? And I said, I've been following her on LinkedIn for a while and really impressed with what she was saying, how she was saying it, bringing people together. And as we worked on this program, my first call to Natasha was, you don't know me. She said, Susan, it's so good to see you again. And it's like, what? Apparently over a decade ago, we had worked together. We knew each other. Natasha had since changed her last name, gotten married, and her time at Serve DC really brought her into that world of volunteerism and community and working together. So as soon as we started talking, it was like, oh, just the right pick. So with this, Natasha's bio can be found in the materials we sent to you with the link, as well as I think will appear in the chat area as well. So Natasha, it's yours. Oh, I have to stop share. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me transition and share my screen. Okay, it looks like everyone can see it. Thank you so much, Susan. I have deep gratitude for you. I'm so grateful that you reached out to me via LinkedIn. And this is a full circle moment for us. So very grateful for this opportunity. Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to have this opportunity. Today is an offering for you to learn and share as resonant. My presentation represents the work of my team and I at Community Build Ventures. It is our experience of doing deep analysis and strategy, leading annual to multi-year learning journeys with individuals and organizations, and implementing actions and activities to help individuals and organizations move towards racial equity. In support of community, I want to first acknowledge that my throat is not cooperating. I have been taking some home natural remedies. So I will be periodically pulling up my water, taking some natural throat remedies. And so I ask you also to get comfortable. Please grab something to write with, get comfortable. I always tell people you can not be in your chair. You can actually lay down and participate in this. Whatever you need to be comfortable, have some water. I have mine, and have food if you need it. And so just want everyone as a community care tool for us today are those things. Throughout my session, I am featuring art by Bisa Butler, Ramar Bearden, Alexis Pauline Gums, E.L. Chisholm, and Aisha Pennerman. These are all Black artists that support me. This is a practice that I have been doing that helps others to really harmonize with Black bodies, style, art, and culture. Land is sacred. It's something sacred to all of us, whether we acknowledge it or not. I always begin any conversation, any facilitation, or any strategy session with first acknowledging the land. I currently live on Muskogee Creek land on what is now called South Fulton, Georgia. And here on my screen is a resource for you to begin to learn more about the land that you occupy. Native Land Digital strives to create and foster conversations about the history of colonialism, indigenous ways of knowing, and settler indigenous relations. So again, please, as we start this time together, to go to this link, the QR code and the website is listed there. And if you've been able to find that, you will simply type in your address and please share in the chat on the land that you're currently occupying. This is just very helpful for us to acknowledge the real erasure and the real attempted genocide of indigenous people. I want to note that the map is not perfect. It's a work in progress, but it has a beginning resources to take your curiosities to learn more about about the land that you currently occupy. If you have been able to go to the site, again, please share the land that you occupy in the comments section together. So thank you for that opportunity to acknowledge. I also, before I begin, I also want to bring in ancestors that serve as my guide. This is helpful for me in my own curiosity and learning, my own analysis and awareness, and really to uproot things that are anti-Black. And so I always bring in Ida B. Wells, who struggled for anti-lynching laws after her beloved friend was lynched in Memphis. I always bring in Lucille Clifton, who was the poet laureate for Maryland, for the state of Maryland. And she is a master of concise, very powerful and concise. I bring in with me Bell Hooks, who provides beautiful articulation of love. Audre Lorde, a Black queer feminist who brings perspective on healing and creation of new tools and systems for freedom and liberation. I also bring in Maryland's own Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She's an author, abolitionist, who was quoted in saying, "We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul." I also want to bring in my granny, Arnett Osborne, who raised communities in Newport, Tennessee. My mother, Reva Marshall Turk, who was an artist and cook, and she taught me love in action. And I always bring in bees as also a death doula in my practice. Bees are thought to be death guides for the spirits to go to the next plane. You can see them carved in ancient tombs. I recently was in Mexico and learned about the Melipona biche bee, in which was a sacred healing resource for the Mayans in Mexico, and they're a stingless bee. And I also invite you to just take a moment to bring in your ancestors. They can be your direct line, ancestors that you feel connected to. Ancestors can be land, water, animals. And I will share this later, why this is an important practice as we move towards racial equity. So just give you a moment to think about that for a moment, to locate your ancestors. Thank you for that moment. So when I think about just this session, and so you think, racial equity, which is something that my team and I have experienced, working with organizations that are trying to become pro-Black or trying to become more racial equity centered. What we often encounter is organizations often want a strategy, a guide, a checklist, a framework. They want something that can plug and play, literally. Most people, most organizations have not done the initial foundational work to actually become who they are and not what they say. So this is why the statements that we saw from 2020 did not stick, because our approach to work is hurry up fast right now. We just need the perfect, right? Everything is about perfection. We want the perfect strategy. We want the perfect guide, the checklist. And if we just plug and play, we can be racial equity centered. And what I will say is that we're seeing, though, on the opposite, what organizations actually need in order to stay on course, to build stamina, to build strength towards racial equity. And what we're acknowledging in our practice, in my practice particularly, is that organizations need analysis and awareness. They need practices. They need competencies. We want to ensure, again, an increase in stamina and strength. And we believe that these things will shift culture. But we can never belong to a strategy. We can never belong to a movement either. Though we can be a part of it, we can only belong to a culture. And this quote is from Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. As you see this quote on the screen, and as I recited it out loud, what words or phrases stand out to you? And please feel free to share in the chat. Thank you. Thank you. And so, again, what we've experienced is that the leaders, I think our society, our culture, does a great job of developing policies, right? We do a great job. We can create a policy, and we can make a statement that promotes racial equity. And we can talk about being anti-racist and being pro-Black organizations. However, I don't think what we're experiencing is that these organizations that come to us that we work with don't always understand what they're asking. This is especially true following the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks here in Atlanta, and the renewed focus on structural racism. When I hear leaders say they want to be more racial equity centered, to my ears, they're asking to be in direct conflict with where they are and willing to disrupt the culture. This is the invitation. It will require a new way of being. So I'm always trying to help organizations to understand, embrace, and embody racial equity. And so, what is the approach to cultural transformation? What does that look like to move towards racial equity and move with integrity and be intentional about transforming your culture to build the stamina and strength? So the first thing is race-based building. We've created a protocol, a trademark protocol that has helped people to create the container for the work. The next is practices. So through our work, we have shared and developed practices for people to move through to embody racial equity. And then the next thing is competencies. So what is the ongoing work? Again, racial equity is a journey. It's an ongoing journey to unlearn, to disrupt, to dismantle, to create something new away from 400 years of white supremacy. Okay. So I want to start with race-based building. So with race-based building, it is our way, Community Build Ventures' way of acknowledging that there is an immediate stress response when I even say the word white supremacy, when I say the word race, racism, immediate right? In our culture and what we've experienced every day, just in my neighborhood, when I say those words, there's an immediate stress response: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so how do we create a container to a new way? We were not given the tools. We didn't grow up in elementary, middle, and high school learning how to have conversations that is centered in history, making amends, apologizing, confronting. We've never exercised that muscle. And so how do we just begin, right? And so what we've created is believing that a container is a required prerequisite for community members that seek to discuss race, racism, or racial equity. A supporting working container assists all community members representing diverse spectrums, ethnicities, race, backgrounds, experiences, with developing a connection to each other, the work ahead, and themselves. Brave space building is a framework for building that container. It helps us to unmask, to show up fully as human beings so that we can share experiences authentically and engage more deeply in conversations that center race. So with Brave Space Building, we developed 6 elements, 6 protocols that create a foundation for transformational work. The first one is feelings. It positions you to better understand what triggers your emotions and how to manage them more effectively. It also just honestly helps the rest of the community to know what's going on with you. How can we support you? How can we hold you? How can we hold space for you? Gratitude helps the community to bond and serves as an invitation to the group to operate from a place of curiosity, empathy, and trust. Attentions allows you to focus on who you are in the moment, to recognize and live your values, and to raise your emotional energy. Community agreements provide a common framework for how people should work together as they take part in transformational action. Assumptions are used for centering or grounding around the approach to the work of racial equity. They're all taken as facts, which are called out in order to further participants' abilities to show up fully, willing not only see each other's potential for growth, but their own. An example of an assumption is everyone has learned isms. Never ask, if you have it, you ask, how is it showing up right now, right? That's an assumption for the community in your organization. And then the last element is shared language. It's really a common way for us to say certain terms. So when I say race, this is what it means. It's an introduction to terms with the assumption that we all have more to learn and understand about racial equity. It is intended to prompt you into deeper analysis on your own. So these are the elements of brave space building. And when we do brave space building, it never fails. Any organization that we start with, there's always some emotions that come up for people because we have not taken a moment to check in with each other in our organizations. It always happens the very first time that we do it, there's emotions. There is a moment to pause, a moment to be quiet. And it opens up vulnerability. It opens up trust for the journey ahead, okay? And so we're gonna take a moment to do brave space building, just giving you a moment. And we're just gonna focus on the first 3. Feelings, how are you feeling? What are you grateful for? And what are your intentions? So I'm just gonna give you a moment to kind of think about that. Those 3 things: how you're feeling, what are you grateful for, and what are your intentions? To locate that, and please share in the chat. I'll give us about 30 minutes to do that, and we'll play some music as you locate your feelings, gratitude, and intentions. To clarify, I'm giving you about 1 minute to identify your feelings, gratitude, and intentions. Please share in the chat. That was a little over a minute. I apologize. I think I said 30 minutes. I'm at 1 minute. And I am seeing folks chime in and share their feelings, gratitude, and intentions. So again, just imagine as you begin the conversation to create brave space, to be able to focus first, to really check in on each other and the work ahead before diving in, right? To acknowledge that we have so much more to learn and to be there for each other in our organizations, right? And again, what we've seen is people begin to use brave space building to take a moment to pause, right? This allows you a moment to space to think your thoughts, to get them out as human beings. And so this is what brave space building does as an initial step of moving towards racial equity. All right. Now, the next approach is practices, okay? And so again, this session is all about building stamina and strength. And before I talk about some of these practices, I want to bring in some shared language. And so the shared language of what is racial equity. And so for the purposes of this conversation, race no longer determines one's socioeconomic outcomes when everyone has what they need to thrive, no matter where they live. I'm using the definition provided by Race Forward, okay? And so when I think of practices, so what are the practices that center racial equity in our bodies? So again, what we've learned doing this work around racial equity is that trauma has happened due to white supremacy, and trauma is inherited genetically. And in order for us to acknowledge that, we have to take a somatic approach in regards to racial equity. So that lives in our body and we have a reaction to things, right? And we also we must do this in community because we're learning, right? We're learning together. And so what are those practices that center racial equity within our bodies and within community? All right. So I'm going to talk about 4 practices that we believe are important and that we provide no matter if we're doing a learning session or talking about strategy with an organization or an activity. We start with these practices. So the first practice is noticing. All right. And so noticing is really sensing an energetic shift, right? If you've ever been in a meeting and someone says something and oh, the energy in the room shifts, or your heart begins to beat, but no one says anything. No one pauses, no one calls it out. No one says, you know what, I'm feeling something different. Let's have a moment of reflection on what was just said. Right? Let's slow this down. You just said something that hit me in a way, and I want to be curious about that, right? Most of the time when that shift happens, we keep moving, right? Because that's our approach to work. We just move, right? And that is, noticing is so important in racial equity. I believe if people notice more, most of these statements would not have gone out in 2020. Because if they would have noticed, because they would have seen the energetic shift with their staff members. With one organization that we worked with, the leadership, which was mostly white leadership, crafted a Black Lives Matter statement. They are a housing justice organization. They did not consult any Black staff, who is the majority of the staff who are frontline in Black communities, and their board fought to put that statement out, but they thought it was important because they're working in Black communities. When they put that statement out, they had no intentions of moving forward with the things that they said. And it caused great backlash, it caused great harm, and it caused an energy of retaliation within the organization. And we came in and had to do a lot of conflict and resolution work. We also had to work with them on making amends and apologizing, just a real retaliation energy within the organization, because they didn't take a moment to notice, like, are we really ready for this? What we're about to say, right? So that is noticing. The next one is holding space. It's being able to acknowledge others' feelings while holding your own. It is the process of witnessing and validating someone else's emotional state while simultaneously being present with your own. So for example, we see this all the time on social media, but I will say within an organization, and that's the beauty of brave space building. One of the assumptions is words, ideas, things people say can be trash, but people can never be trash. The other assumption around people's feelings are valid, even if what is informing those feelings are incorrect, right, or invalid, right? But it's being able to hold that, and just also, just thinking about another partner as well, an organization that supports philanthropic philanthropy. And during brave space building, one of the participants, as they were sharing their feelings, began to weep. And we held space for that person. The entire organization was silent and felt comfortable sharing. And they felt that they were heard. And they were able, we were able to reschedule the meeting based on that. Again, this approach to time, this construct of around time, but we saw that this person, we needed to take a pause. And holding space, at that moment had to be rooted in slowing down. Regardless, for us, we're trying to move through the agenda, but we knew we needed to slow down because no work would happen, right? The next one is practicing accountability. It's a practice of self-reflection, apology, repair, and change behavior. So this one is a big one because over 400 years, and we still have not done a job around truth and reconciliation, around real apology, around repair, and all the facets that repair is. For example, Black people, should have a right to heal, right? And then also changing the behavior. So what we saw in the wave in the past 4 years is folks not really self-reflecting how their own organization contribute to, racism, and also not apologizing, not really thinking about what repair is and change behavior. And so through our work, we follow the work of Mia Mingus, and she shares that true accountability is not only apologizing, understanding the impact of your actions have caused on yourself and others, making amends or reparations to the harmed party, and most importantly, true accountability is changing your behavior so that the harm, violence, and abuse does not happen again. I will give you an example that happened directly in my organization. I was moving too fast. We were bringing on a new project. We have a cooperative of consultants, of coaches, strategists, and facilitators. And I reached out without talking to our current team. I reached out to one of our cooperative members and was like, hey, you want to do this? And then the team was like, wait, we need to talk about this before. And I had to pull back that opportunity from that cooperative member. And that really harmed her because she turned down another opportunity, right? So with even in my own organizations, as I'm working to be pro-Black and center a healing justice framework, I caused harm. And so I apologize, did some self-reflection on how I was just moving too fast. And I apologize to my team because I didn't take the time to talk to them. So I apologize. And I shared that I need to repair this. And I asked her, how can I make amends for this? What does repair look like for you? And then I began to do my own reflection of like, how can I change my behavior of moving too darn fast, right? And so what came out of that is that she wanted compensation. She wanted me to publicly share with others about what transpired with the team. And I did that. And so, that's practicing accountability. That is full on vulnerability, full on vulnerability on display. But again, this is all a practice, right? And then the next, practice that we talk about is strengthening curiosity. It is creating space for inquiry, research, and reflection. As taught by Dr. Barbara Love in her beautiful framework of liberatory consciousness, that this work requires analysis and awareness. We need space to be curious, to inquire, to research, to reflect, to understand history, to see the through line of how, as an organization, why do we keep doing the same thing over and over and thinking we're going to have a different result? How, why we continue to work in this way and think we're going to have a different result. And so these are the 4 practices. These are not isolated practices. I want to give that caveat, right? They're all interrelated. So for example, if I decide I want to focus as an organization, like we really want to focus on strengthening our curiosity, to really confront and look at and analyze our practices, we're also noticing, we're also practicing accountability, and we're holding the dissonance all at the same time, right? And so these are the practices that we infuse all the time. We don't come out and say, hey, you're noticing, but what happens in brave space building and centering these practices, people begin to step back and say, right, and slow down and really think about the gravity of moving towards racial equity. Brave space building, as I mentioned before, practices and now competencies. And so competencies, I know that there has been a wave of people figuring out like, what is the work, right? People have heard this term, you need to do the work. And so at Community Build Ventures, we've articulated 10 competencies. Again, this is a journey that we all can work towards. If you were able to grab our toolkit, we do have a survey called So You Think You Know Racial Equity, and it highlights 10 racial equity competencies that we all can be working towards in our work. And the first one is articulating racial equity. So again, a lot of folks put out statements of like, hey, this is racial equity. This is, what we stand for, what we uphold. But articulating racial equity is really fluency and comfort around speaking about what racial equity means at our organization and in the world, including the ability to identify, discuss, confront interpersonal, institutional, and systemic anti-Black racism. And when we articulated this, we knew that this wave of racial equity was going to fall flat. It wasn't going anywhere because, again, the real fluency and comfort and really the ability to identify and discuss and confront interpersonal and institutional anti-Black racism, we knew that those organizations wouldn't go anywhere, right? We knew it because they had not done some of the foundational work of really grappling with racial equity and what that means in our organization. The next is understanding the role of racial equity. Like, how does racial equity play within your projects, right? As an organization, but as each individual, how does that play in your projects and your organization's broader portfolio, broader work, right? The next one is interrogating own biases. This means this is the ability to interrogate your own personal biases and worldview and to modify your own behavior on a daily basis based on that interrogation. Understanding power, right? And so for us at Community Build Ventures, white supremacy at its foundation, at its root, is defining what is humanity. And then the mechanisms of the economic systems, religion, even how we talk about art and culture, history, those things supported that idea of who was human in America. And so deep understanding of the history of white supremacy and racial inequity in America, including around the idea, right, that race is a social construct, right? And the ways that throughout our history systems were designed that isolate and separate us, and that empower a select few based on the invention of race with the privilege of innovation, creativity, and power. Understanding power is huge. Unpacking your institutional power is huge, and having those conversations are very important as part of your learning journey. Developing community practices. So race-based building is a community practice, right? It is the ability to maintain and sustain a sense of psychological safety by developing a set of norms and agreements for staff to engage in candid and authentic conversations about race. Showing vulnerability and openness. I mentioned this throughout our conversation of how race-based building supports that, but it's really comfort with making oneself vulnerable at work internally and externally with partners, with your coworkers, based on the understanding that racial equity work is personal and that we are all learners. The next one is engaging in crucial conversations. The ability to facilitate difficult conversations about race toward achieving impact. So how do you, again, create the container to talk about race, to talk about racial equity and white supremacy and your organizations, your institutional power, et cetera. How are you able to engage in those conversations? The next one is examining social issues. So being able to critically examine social issues and messages for racial biases, inequities, the impact on oneself and others' thinking, emotions, and behaviors. One organization that we worked with was doing a lot of work around reproductive health. And so part of our learning journey around confronting structural anti-Black racism was taking them through the history of learning about Lucy, Betsy, and Onaka, who we believe are the mothers of gynecology, who are three enslaved women that we have been able to name that were brutalized, that move gynecology advances, honestly. And then we looked at the history of Black wombs and what's happening with Black womb health. I personally experienced one of my classmates who died in childbirth. Has a master's degree, loving husband, had a child before that, but she died in childbirth. And we looked at that and examined that and talked about the through line and that social issue on reproductive health as it relates to Black wombs. But that was possible because we created a container and provided some initial pre-work for them to learn and really reflect on their own about it. And then they came together as a community to have the conversation about reproductive health. The next one is understanding history of racism and core constructs. So at the beginning of my conversation, I shared, and I brought ancestors in the room with us, brought my ancestors and asked you to do the same. In this country, I recognize that we don't have enough curiosity around history. We are not, in my opinion, good stewards of history. Learning about relevant amendments, laws, and regulations. But I will say a lot of the ancestors, some of which I brought up, have already told us, this is not new knowledge, they have already told us and have great insight in thinking about how do we move away from white supremacy. They have already told us about the 14th Amendment, the federal Indian policy, the immigration policies, those policies that wanted to take indigenous people into urban areas, away from their culture and their land, and the real power movement from those communities because their approximation with Black civil rights movement. So all of those things help us to see a way and a thinking, and to add on to that great ancestral knowledge. And then the last one I will share is practicing healing justice. This one is huge for us because we recognize the real trauma that racism has caused and continue to cause, the harm and the violence, the real attempted genocide, erasure. And the part of healing justice is eradication, right? On this journey of racial equity is eradication of those systems that continue to cause the trauma, right? The ability to repair. And so healing justice is really like, what is our healing justice practice in our organization to hold the dissonance, to acknowledge and repair harm, and to name the ways that your organization is complicit in the systems that you are trying to change. And then within your organization, so that you can begin to practice and feel what it's like, right? To have a culture of care, like creating a culture of care and accountability to self, colleagues, partners, and communities. So I'm going to bring up another organization that we worked with, that when we started working with them, and we did brave space building, and we were in a circle, and we did a clearing of the space. We allowed them to sit on pillows, to sit in chairs, to be comfortable. I remember one staff member was like, what is this? Like it's fluff, like, what is this mess, right? Like, what are you doing? And at the end of our year-long journey, they understood how care helps you to slow down, to think, to be able to see possibilities, how having a self-care plan opens up, like, oh my goodness, like how they've been harmful to others in the work environment. And I think the biggest thing for this same organization, they instituted a sabbatical policy. And in that policy, they realized that the way that they've been working themselves was causing great harm, and that folks that have put in at least 5 years in the organization should have a moment for rest. And even the leader who, juggling everything, realized how rest opens up the possibilities for a strategy and a culture that centers racial equity. And so just thinking of them, also thinking of another organization, we were brought in to change their grant making strategy. They wanted us to talk with their grantees, to think about, as a foundation, how can they really embody social justice and racial equity in the way that they work in racial equity. And they found that it first starts with them within, and they came up with a radical 5-year plan to move towards, racial equity in a way in which they found greater sisterhood among themselves. They were able to slow down. They were able to see the possibilities of what freedom and liberation could look like in support of that within their grant making, right? And so again, all of these competencies taken together is really about how can we be more human in our work, because white supremacy is limiting on who has humanity and how humanity should show up. And so these are the competencies. If you have not had the opportunity, I encourage you to take the survey. It just allows you to just have a moment of reflection. It provides understand, embrace, and embody as those 3 levels. And then you get some reflection at the end regarding your movement towards racial equity, a fully embodiment. All right. So at the beginning, I mentioned, when organizations come to us, they want strategy, a guide, a checklist, a plug and play. And so for us, the work, the doing, the work that folks should be doing, and when people talk about you should do the work, is really foundational. It's really the need for analysis and awareness, practices, and competencies. And again, how are you creating that container to have the conversations that you need? What are the practices? So again, those 4 practices that I shared: noticing, holding space, practicing accountability, and strengthening curiosity. How are we holding these practices? How are we doing that? How are we living our values as well, right? And then competencies. Just thinking about how can you move towards that. And I would say with the competencies, those are 10 competencies. Usually the organizations that we work with will really focus on the areas through that survey, collective survey, the areas that they think, we need more understanding towards racial equity. And we're going to focus on this. And here's the ways that we're going to do this. The beauty about the competencies, again, just like the practices, when you pick one, you're actually also moving towards the others. Thank you so much for listening. I've enjoyed the comments, the curiosity that has taken place within my time with you all. So just very grateful, and I'm looking forward to build together and learn from my fellow panelists as well. So deep gratitude. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Susan. I can't hear you, Susan, if you're talking.
Thank you for that clarity on the microphone. Yes, I messed up. Thank you, Natasha. Just wonderful. I have notes written all over my paper. We're gonna switch back the share screen to me. So just a moment while you watch the how the hot dogs are made. So thank you. So we're going to now switch to the next phase of this program. I want to introduce Laila Salguero. She is the moderator for today's program. She is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Peraton. She is responsible for aligning the company's DEI goals with their measurable building outcomes. And she also has a background addressing the company's ethics, compliance with quality, and risk management efforts. We're glad to have somebody with this expertise handle the Q&A with Natasha, and then we will bring you through the additional panelists as well. So Laila, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Natasha. I do have a couple of questions for you. And as a reminder for everyone, we will open up the questions for everyone after we hear from all of our panelists, but feel free, I've seen some activity on the chat already, so feel free to ask your questions anytime. Natasha, back to you. You asked us, and I didn't see in the chat, but what are you grateful for?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Laila. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful for my company. We decided to take a break until January 17th.
Oh, nice.
And this is our first time easing into the new year. So I'm really grateful for that. Just that month-long opportunity for reflection. And to locate like, oh my God, where I am now, and where do I want to be? And also giving myself grace for all that happened in 2023. So thank you for that. I am complete.
I am happy for you and your team to have until the 17th. That sounds pretty amazing. Let's come talk about some small changes. I know you talked about the competencies and things like that, but what are some baby steps that individuals that are here on the chat that you recommend in order to continue the work on equity?
Sure. So, I'll do it from an individual point of view and then an organization point of view, right? So as an individual, I really, see individuals thinking about and analyzing and come to some awareness of what do these terms mean? Racial equity, right? Just again, step one, what do these things mean to me and how have I seen them show up, right? And what are the important terms that I really need to define for the work that I'm doing in regards to racial equity? As an organization, I think is paramount first to create the container. Oftentimes we see a lot of harm and violence that happens when people jump right in and approach the work of like, we're just gonna have it there where we just talk about it. And it's just like, no, that's not how that works, because we've never in our culture, in our organizations have not done that. And so slowing down and creating the container to hold the work. Like when we come together, we're a community. And again, we offer brave space building as an initial baby steps for organizations to learn what that is and actually what's happening in their body on why those elements work.
Yeah, it sounds like knowing the audience and where we all as an organization are, and also knowing ourselves and knowing where we are to be able to have these conversations.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, just that as you were saying that, is that I'm seeing a lot of people move in racial equity lacking integrity in this work and not making statements and have not done internal work. I see organizations a lot of time really focus on the external, outside, and not do the internal inside, right? The organ work. And so it's very important. This is about walking the talk and not saying things, because it creates real harm when we say things and we have not done some internal work with ourselves before we say all of these things.
So it sounds like, and you talked about this a little bit, right? Lots of organizations made statements a few years ago when the George Floyd tragedy happened, and it's a matter of reflecting back on those statements and how true you were to them, and if not making the work, taking some of the steps that you mentioned and doing the work to get there, to make those statements real.
Absolutely. And so to be clear, those statements were capitalist responses. Let's be clear about what those responses were. They were not rooted in changing culture for providing space for Black people to heal. It was not about that. It was not healing justice. It was a capitalist response, right? And in a capitalist response, it's about immediate impact, immediate gratification. It's about overworking. It's about all of these things that show up in our organization. And if we're wanting to do something different, we have to shift. We have to shift the way that we work. And if we're not willing to do that, don't make the statement. Don't do it.
So one of the things that we are going to do right now is we have a number of panelists that, in addition to you, Natasha, will be joining us in this conversation to talk about we brought together members of our community, right, to talk about what actions we can do to support equity in our community. And we asked the panelists to share actions, their successes, their lessons learned on whether they're looking for personal growth. So the I, and as you can see on the screen, the we, what can we do for organizational change, and what changes can we make in our community as a whole? So the us. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I know that there's a handout with the bios, so I will just introduce the panelists here. So we've got Briana Cleveland. She is the Director of Volunteer Engagement at Martha's Table in Washington, D.C. We've got Deron Campbell, a Director of Health Equity and Community Health Programs within Nova Health Systems based here in Fairfax. And we've got Dr. Nathan Carter, serves as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Northern Virginia Community College with campuses throughout the Northern Virginia area. So we're going to ask each of our panelists to take 5 minutes to address the actions that we just discussed. The I, yourself, the we, organization, and us in the community. And Briana, would you like to start here?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I just want to thank Volunteer Fairfax, everyone in this panel, just for this beautiful conversation. Natasha, you gave us such great nuggets, things that are applicable not just to the work that we do, but that heart work, right? That anatomical work that we have to do in order to remain consistent, authentic, and transparent with the process and this ongoing journey of diversity. So thank you so much. I'm very excited to join all of you this morning. Again, my name is Briana Cleveland, and I have the pleasure of serving at Martha's Table. When I think about this topic, it personally resonates as a professional of color, having to navigate many different spaces, many of which, were historically just not designed for minorities of any sort. Finding my voice, undergoing the process of balancing identity, culture, history, success. What does it mean to be in corporate America as a person of color who enjoys changing my hair several times a week and wearing bright colors and having a melanated skin, but amongst those who do not have that just basic experience. What does it mean when someone is genuinely asking a question related to diversity versus someone who is being implicitly or explicitly harmful with their words as it relates to race? How does self-navigate that? How can I maintain my own sanity and psyche and emotional safety while still looking to achieve success? And should I become an advocate, right? That is a choice. Should I try to educate? Should I try to facilitate tough conversations about empathy and feelings and integrity and greatness? So my personal journey with that has evolved over the years through varying forums such as this, through educational opportunities and just real world experiences. I have, again, the privilege of working at a phenomenal local-based nonprofit in Washington, D.C. Martha's Table is unique in that it has been in existence for over 45 years, but in the last 60 years, the organization's leadership took a very targeted approach. We were in an area of the city that was heavily gentrified, and those who typically utilize the services were being relocated and resourced into other areas of the city. Our leadership said, you know, we really need to go where the need is. Where is the need? We took a place-based approach and asked people in the community, do you want us here? How can we best help support you? We are now have a very focused strategic plan in Southeast Washington, D.C., east of the river. This is an area of the city that has been historically under-resourced with a terrible narrative regarding stereotypes. Our organization programming also consists of 13 to 17 various programs, all of which are run by volunteers. We utilize anywhere from 500 to 600 volunteers per week. As a part of the strategy, we really wanted to utilize that opportunity of bringing so many different people together towards a common cause. This is an opportunity to foster the exact conversation we're having now, diversity and equity and inclusion. That the makeup of those 600 individuals is a diverse group. We often have individuals from varying parts of the city, even parts of the world. We have study abroad programs that serve with us. And amongst those are people who may have come across individuals in that volunteer experience that they would have never seen before in any other setting. We started to notice that and said, hey, there's an opportunity here to really start to advocate and advance DEI practices. A lot of things that we do in order to support that as an organization is when we have maybe a group from Nova Scotia and a group of students from area high schools to start facilitating those conversations and setting ground rules of safe space. Very much as Susan shared earlier with Natasha's words, you know, hey, if somebody says something that makes you feel something, let's pause for a second. Like, let's talk about that. You know, let's do that assessment. Our team all have undergone trainings around DEI and facilitation in order to facilitate those conversations and create that space. We see we have transformed, we have incorporated the opportunity to have people walking away from their volunteer experience, not just serving and saying that they were able to support 600 or 700 families that day, but also walking away with a new lens of perspective and toolkit around DEI practices as well. We've had people come in and kind of take a look and start engaging with people through implicit biases and stereotypes, and then walk away sharing phone numbers and scheduling meetups and lunches. You know? So it's a really transformative thing to see. Tons of hard work that we are all pretty committed to doing, and something that we're really excited to share with you all and continue the work alongside everyone here. So thank you, Laila, for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Briana. Deron, why don't we move to you?
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. So I am going to tackle a bit of the we because I worked a lot within my own organization and organizations in my throughout my professional history to work to address inequities and disparities in some capacity. And likely a lot of them were based you know, in race and ethnicity. And so I loved everything that Natasha was talking about. You know, for many organizations, 2020 was a framing year, but it's not a year of origin. So 2020 is a year where we were met with a lot of unrest and a lot of these opportunities to address inequities and disparities that come to a head. But it's not a year of origin when we talk about racism and prejudice and discrimination in this country. And so most organizations, as she said, took a capitalist approach to addressing this, to addressing unrest and not acknowledging a journey to improve something internally and externally that would aid in calming and preventing unrest. And so I believe to start, you know, I like to lead up to how we can show support, but to start, this conversation of racial equity is a historical conversation, and that needs to be acknowledged. Most organizations like to start in 2020 or the examples and experiences that were happening in our present day, but this is a conversation about history. And a lot of us as individuals have a very targeted and involved history within this conversation. And so that must be acknowledged in order to get to what I believe is justice within the conversation of equity, which is in creating spaces of inclusion and belonging. But that's very advanced, and that takes a lot of work to really acknowledge what this transformative process needs to look like to improve culture. I believe that history also shows us that the conversation around racial equity has been very disjointed. It's been very start-stop. It involves lots of generation gaps that never sufficiently created a continuous journey. And we have to acknowledge that. And so most organizations mimic that disjointed start-stop process of what this cultural transformation really looks like. And so that is something that I have been throwing a lot of my weight behind to target, to really talk about those generational gaps and what that sort of evidence then looked like, and to really message a cohesive and collective approach to how we really put our energy, time, and effort into this cultural transformation, and that it involves everyone. You know, when we talk about equity, commonly we point the finger at minorities because that they have been the most egregious victims in this process, but equity is about everyone. And so how do we create spaces of inclusion and belonging where we're acknowledging everyone in their journey into this, and how we ultimately achieve some sort of comprehensive, and inclusive culture that really nurtures everyone. And so I will fast forward to my what I consider like support, so where we can really advance this conversation. Is really getting rid of the ideology and notion that just building this thing means that it's sufficient or it's utilized, and that's not a thing. Like just building it won't get them to come. And so in healthcare, that's not something that really has worked throughout history. And so when you really contextualize that within the conversation of race and ethnicity, you lead to further evidence of disenfranchisement, marginalization, and so we really need to take a look at that and really identify that just building a framework is not sufficient enough. It needs to be used, it needs to be actionable, and it needs to be messaged continuously over time. Organizations need to really denounce the fear of losing what they consider valuable employees if they're not actually leading to the value add of producing a positive, inclusive culture. And so we can't be afraid to lose those that we have given gold stars that really maybe didn't deserve them, or don't show up well, or really are not lending their full support to transforming themselves as an individual, so that we can get to a healthier we, so that we can get to a healthier us. I believe that organizations need to incorporate racial equity into their mission, vision, and values of the organization, so that it is permeated throughout, so that messaging is not just codified and stopped in the C-suite, that it reaches those mid-level individuals and trickles down to those frontline staff. And then frontline staff also enhance the network and the messaging back up to the C-suite, as in terms of it being a circular and, again, a continuous journey and mobilization throughout this. I believe that organizations need to lean into really creating spaces of inclusion and belonging, those avenues for everyone to learn and educate themselves. Not everyone is going to be a Martin Luther King Jr. or, to be someone who is thoroughly educated and knowledgeable about racial equity, about what this journey looks like, about cultural transformation. And they may be just starting off, they may be just understanding how these experiences really impact the whole of society and not just themselves as individuals, and what privilege they can stand on that create spaces of comfortability. And so, creating multiple points of access, but again, messaging throughout the whole that the end goal is for everyone to be included and to nurture, spaces of inclusion and belonging. And then be intentional with setting and resetting goals, that this is an opportunity for improvement and continuous improvement, and that we're always going to run into examples where this conversation can be improved and enhanced over time. And so, organizations really need to understand that this is not something that can be stopped, or when, metrics or numbers look like they're at their peak or pinnacle, that means that the journey or conversation is done. It's not. There's always work to do as long as diversity exists in, our society. And so I'll stop there because I'm only supposed to have 5 minutes. But
thank you, because
just
your
thank you.
comments were resonating. I could see some of the questions and comments and some claps as you were speaking, and I also see the questions to Briana. So we'll get to those Q&A in a minute, because everything that you're saying has definitely resonated and elicited some questions. But we'll move it right now to Nathan Carter. If you can give us your 5 minutes as well.
Sure. I want to begin my 5 minutes by acknowledging the power in the words that have been spoken so far in this session, and how meaningful and important it is to spend time talking about this. I also want to give honor to my ancestors as well. Before I share some remarks, I come to this work without any reservation that I would not be here if it weren't for my family. Now, I grew up mixed race in Southern California. I didn't have great grades, and certainly didn't come from any kind of thing that looked anywhere close to an affluent background. I struggled. I struggled hard, and so did my family, in Southern California, in some very challenging conditions that were only in place because of a history of racism, a history of division that is closely tied to our country. And it affects many people, and it affected me. And so I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my community and my family constantly helping me understand the importance of education and resilience and empathy for other people. My grandmother grew up in the South, and she always told me, she was saying, Nate, you have to remember that humanity is more important than social challenges and differences, and she really helped to instill in me, I guess I would say, that as a mixed race young man, you must constantly listen and be present, and do your best to try to be a bridge between differences, even differences that were in my own family. So I want to acknowledge that, but I think to recognize, I guess, about where we are right now in society in 2024. So I talked a little bit about my upbringing many odd years ago, but when we reflect on where we are right now in 2024, I don't think there's any way, right, that we can't acknowledge that there is a growing lack of connection between individuals in this country, in this world, perhaps, right? And the significance of a sense of belonging, or the lack of a sense of belonging, is ever present in everything that we do. There are so many people that feel adrift in society, in their neighborhoods, and their places of work, because they're not experiencing a sense of belonging, because they are being cast aside, not seen for who they are, not allowed to grow and to thrive as who they are. We have all experienced this sting of feeling unwelcomed in a place that is supposed to be familiar, right? And that causes a lot of pain. And it's not just me saying that because I experienced as a mixed race person, but we can turn to research, we can turn to health science, and we know that the feelings of being excluded and not seen for who you are has impacts neural pathways in our brain that's akin to physical pain. And when you experience that kind of physical pain from a lack of sense of belonging, it impacts your ability to live, right? It can create a heightened sense of defensiveness, as it did in me as a young child. It can lead one to act impulsively because you're experiencing pain. And that is what these conversations are about, right? It is the greatest injustice I think that we're facing as a society is an injustice of sense of belonging and a recognition of how institutions and organizations, when not doing some of the things that we've heard about so far, can do great harm to everyone. So that's a little bit from the I, but I want to emphasize the importance of the us, because I think that there are things that each individual and each organization needs to do. But I want to take it down off of the academic sense of the word as I work I know I work in higher education, so sometimes I can be a little bit verbose, but just on a granular level, organizations and individuals, what we need to do, what the us needs to do is we need to be present and extend and a welcome. You know, think about the amount of time and energy that it takes to purposefully, with intention, set aside usual distractions of things undone from yesterday to focus on the things that you can do now and tomorrow. You know, you bring your full self into the workplace, into your communities, and it's important that those spaces welcome you for who you are. And that doesn't happen accidentally. I talk about listening deeply with empathy, listen intently to what is said, but I always say, you know, listen to understand, not listen to be understood. It's not about winning, but what are the feelings beneath the words? You know, the soul of someone's life, right? The conditions of disclosure and discovery that they offer up to you. You know, listen to yourself too. Achieve that balance between listening, acting, and speaking. And then speak your truth. Right? Speak your truth, trust what's in your voice, what's in your heart. What's true to you may be not true to somebody else that's in front of you. It may seem different, but speaking your own truth with I statements and allowing, if you're a listener, to accept those I statements and approach that conversation with curiosity as opposed to trying to debate makes a world of difference. So, you know, again, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have this conversation about what we do, you know, as this man over here said, right? A threat to injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I think I got that one right. So we all need to focus on this work and be self-reflective in so doing it and connect that to your own story. And don't hesitate, as I tried to do in a few opening remarks, to share your story with those around you so that they can see the shared humanity in you. And together you can work together as an us to get us to a better place. But it takes intention, it takes reflection, and it takes courage.
Yeah, and what I've heard everyone say too is really the us. It takes all of us working together. And I also love what you all were saying about your families and how, you know, their encouragement and their acknowledgement of the struggles, frankly, and of some of the I'll just speak for, from my personal experience, second generation went to school not knowing any English at all, right? So that right there, but at the same time, I was always told you need to go to school, you need to go to school, without really the support on how to navigate that. And so I see that, and I want to make sure that, as we work towards the community, that we're working towards that. Briana, what you mentioned really resonated. I'm going to go back to the chat here, but I did see that someone was asking what specifics you did to include DEI with your volunteer work. I recall when we did a prep call, you told a story about two communities coming together. So would love to hear more about that.
Sure. And actually very much, it's a great segue for what Nathan shared. That the first thing we do is create a welcoming environment. Like, what does that mean? That is, you walk in a space and you see everyone smiling. It's one thing when you're walking a space and folks have their head down, they're not making eye contact, they may just wave you off, but really to eliminate those distractions, as he shared, and extend welcome, looking people in the eye, you're smiling, you're saying, we're so excited to see you here, welcome. That automatically just puts people in a positive mood. They're already feeling that they can be a part of something because someone is paying attention to them and being positive. With the team, we also, to kind of borrow something Nathan said, be really intentional as a team lead of encouraging the team, right? And saying, hey, we are doing transformative work. We're not just passing out apples. We're doing things that are truly going to have impacts on families that really could change the trajectory of someone's experience. So in order to do that, we have to be intentional. We have to be reflective, and we have to be courageous, have courage, right? And the best way for someone to do something that is courageous or confidence is to know that they can rely on someone to be there to support them. So really emphasizing teamwork and equipping the team with the tools that they need, and knowing that support is an expectation and not just an extra. So those two things, making sure that we're fostering a welcoming environment and ensuring that the team is feeling successful and have had the expectation of what we're doing. Once the volunteers come in, and Laila, to your point, we have an orientate. Every program team lead does an orientation. That orientation includes history of the organization, but also provides the historical facts about the community and the neighborhoods that we serve. When we go back to something Natasha spoke about, it's like, really ground setting, who are the people of this community? What are the things that are actually happening? This enables us to really combat some of those stereotypes that folks are walking in the door with. Southeast Washington, D.C. is a place that is known for, unfortunately, gun violence and poverty and car thefts, right? And so we try to really share some of the positive aspects and the actual factual aspects of the area itself. There is a museum here. There are it is a culture, it is an art culture. It is sacred land that our building is on. It Native American. There's a lot of history. So we make a point to not only share that in the orientation, but it's also visual. We have visual indicators and facts and numbers throughout the building. So no matter where you are, you're still being able to get that information. We also will do icebreakers, throughout the volunteer activity. And this gives an opportunity for people to get a sense of like who's in the room. One of my favorites is stand or raise your hand. And so the person facilitator can ask a specific question and say, raise your hand if you've ever planted in a garden before. Raise your hand if you've ever been outside the country. Raise your hand if you went to school with people that didn't look like you. Raise your hand if you know what a rutabaga is, because and even though it may sound low lip, it allows people to see like, hey, I don't know that person, but they went out of the country and I went out of the country. And so even if the person may look different, may, the folks would come from a different affluent background, there is a common ground. And so once we're able to establish like, hey, I look different than you, I have a stereotype about how you look, but you know what a rutabaga is, and so do I. So there's something common there. And so really, again, the specific question is identifying things to kind of foster an opportunity for people to see that common ground and identify shared goals and values. And in closing, I think we like to wrap up the volunteer activity stating impact stats. So we'll tell people this is what you accomplished in your 3 hours. This is how it impacts the community. And also just being very clear and summarizing that experience itself and saying, hey, we just had, we have this group of high school students from Ballou High School. We have the group of ladies of it's the Georgetown Book Club, retired tenured faculty professors here. You all would have never, it's a rare chance that these two groups of people would ever have been together. And we really hope that, you were able to learn from one another, and we hope to see you again, know that this is a space for community, and you all have built a community just sharing the space together, and hope that you continue to foster it. So not only encouraging the team, but encouraging people to continue the work as well.
Those are really great points. Thank you. And especially as I know we've got individuals from all over talking about the volunteer experience. I also wanted to, also from an academic or Deron from a health experience, any words of wisdom there in terms of how we can continue the work in similar to how Briana has done it for the volunteers, some concrete actions that individuals could take. Deron, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. As I had mentioned before, on the organizational level, there's going to need to be education in order to start the process of helping people to acquiesce to this, to really understand what we're talking about, and ultimately to really move towards achieving some sort of holistic, equitable culture that creates space for everyone. And so, as I stated before, it's really going to be about organizations in any capacity really understanding that needs to be multiple points of entry into this conversation, so that we create safe spaces. We do not further enhance things like stigma. We do not create opportunities for microaggressions and so, all of those things are what we can really bring to the table to really promote spaces of inclusion and belonging, which again is the end goal. So, right now, I think most organizations are really wrestling with the understanding of equality versus equity, and how a lot of us are really sitting in spaces of equality, but that's not the real equitable justice that we're looking for everyone. So what does it really mean to transition from equality into, equity and, the further evidence of what that looks like over time within an organization? And so, and really understanding the groundwork of what this foundational change requires and is. Again, as Natasha mentioned, a lot of this was about a capitalist response to unrest in 2020. And a lot of organizations, in my opinion, while this is being recorded, is that there was no real understanding, as she stated, about what this really is and what we're talking about. It's not a Band-Aid. It is, real transformation, real work, real evidence that needs to take place. It's not about a key performance indicator that's ultimately attached to revenues. This is about, holistic treatment of people and how we're really trying to transform cultural and society to treat everyone better. And so, so that's another thing, is really understanding what this transformation needs to look like, what needs to take place in your organization, and how to honestly and authentically get there.
Yeah, it's taking a look. I like the how we introduced this whole topic, right? The I, the we, the us. Nathan, from an educational or just other perspective that you may have on concrete actions.
I can talk about education. Nova at Northern Virginia Community College, we're second largest community college in the country, and we have the honor, distinct honor of trying our best to serve over 65 to 70,000 students every year. But on the education level, Laila, I would say that too often higher education may think about what they're doing as like a transactional relationship between the student getting a diploma and how that diploma can lead to a career, right? But I try to remind my colleagues and faculty and everyone I get opportunity to talk to that, you know, higher education is transformational, not transactional, right? It's about changing and providing an individual with an opportunity to not just learn new concepts and competencies, but to understand in a deeper way their role in life and what they want to do and how they want to do it. It's a life-changing experience to be educated and to learn something new. So despite a lot of debate and discussion about the state of higher education, which I know that's not the focus of this webinar, I can say without question that higher education has a role to play. It is the place charged with developing minds, no matter their background or age or demographic, and providing an opportunity to something far more valuable than a degree. My grandmother is full of sayings, but she said, you know, Nate, your network is your net worth. So you go to college and you engage in community building to build a broader network, different mentors and mentees and friends and colleagues, trying to work across difference to get to a better place. So, you know, for me, higher education is one of the rare places in our society when it's done well, that you have different perspectives coming together to talk about ideas and to expose yourself to different points of view and perspectives to see where that can lead you, right? So if you're trying to build your net worth, think about your network. And I think the colleges, particularly a community college, is a great place for anyone to step into that space, learn something new, connect with someone different from yourself. And in so doing, you walk away from that experience, walk away from that moment with more capacity to, and more empathy to engage in racial equity work like this, which is highly important to do given our history.
So Nathan, people love your grandmother's quotes and yours as well. Yep, some people are writing down what you've said. I want to shift a little bit a direction, Natasha. This question is from the group chat or from the chat. Someone is asking how to be a better ally. It's a long question, so I'll take a piece of it. It says, I know it's a burden on some to feel like they have to teach us about racial injustice. How can I be a better ally?
Thank you. I was actually looking at that question. And this question comes up a lot regarding white presenting people a lot on how can I be a better ally? And it's always typically rooted in, well, how can I understand? And I just want to bring up, first and foremost, racial equity is pioneering work. This has never been done. We have never seen this on this land. It is rooted in white supremacy, is rooted in defining who has humanity and who does not. Let's be clear on that, right? And so part of it is also, as a human being, and in that question is, how have you done your own analysis and awareness from historical point of view of looking through the through line? We know, excuse my French, I'm not gonna say a curse word, I was about to, but we know that attempted genocide, enslavement, stealing land, colonialism, imperialism, and all the fruits of white supremacy. So what are those results of those things? What happened to a people that have been oppressed for over 400 years? What happens? What happens to our indigenous siblings? What happened? you know, for me, when I hear that question, I'm like, so how are you human? How do you, like, those experiences that are happen, how are you deepening your own humanness and centering empathy and learning and doing some deep analysis? That question gets me fired up because I know, as Deron said, there has not been any foundation. We just want to jump in and be an ally without taking a step back, but then also taking a step back with other white folks, with you thinking about your own history, you thinking about, okay, so how did we get here as my people? How did we get here? What part of that that history is that my ancestors are a part of? And so what were the effects and the results of that? And so you don't need to necessarily talk to Black people, but what you can do is say, you know, this is what I'm coming to learn as a white person. This is what I'm coming to learn. And I would like to have a conversation with you, and not as a point of teaching, because that's labor that is not required to be human. You can do that labor yourself. So I know I said a lot, but I want to, you know, just to be clear that what I see, particularly for white presenting people, is that they want immediate answers and they want to be perfect. And they have not done an analysis of white supremacy. And also that analysis is about real fear. White supremacy feeds on fear. It feeds on us not coming together as a community. And so I also see in that question, this fear of messing up, this fear of being white, this shame that I have as a white person, right? And so there's a lot of work there to really undo that in yourself and what you're coming to know through history and your own family as a white presenting person. And centering empathy. Nathan and Deron and Briana have all shared as a human being, how can I center empathy? And so that's what I will offer. And that is the work for you. That is the work. I'm complete. Thank you.
I'm gonna thank you for that, and I saw that the individual, yes, Shannon also mentioned thank you. So there's a question here about volunteerism in terms of reaching out to a broader audience. There's this specific individual works for a suicide prevention. And what they're looking to do is broaden their base of volunteers. And the question seems to be, how do we do that so that we're being inclusive, and at the same time, we feel that the volunteers are speaking to the community that's doing the outreach in this space. Erica, I hope I got that right. I tried to summarize it a bit. I'll open this question up to any of you. I know that it is important to see how we can broaden the volunteers so that the volunteers are look and feel and have the experiences of the individuals that they're supporting.
I can go ahead and take a crack at this, you know, since it has the intersection with healthcare, and also because I've enjoyed working with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, Allie. You know, Erica, if you know Allie, she has been was the representative for this area, and so I did a lot of work with her to address mental health in Alexandria. But I think the first thing is to understand what mental health looks like in different communities. And that is, you know, that's a research thing. And mental health is perceptively different, physically different, spiritually different, in context to a lot of different ethnicities and cultures that exist within Northern Virginia. So you really have to approach it with that understanding. That this is not a universal topic, and there hasn't been universal access for people in this space and lane. I think the next thing is also to figure out where to start. You know, the conversation of mental health is very extreme and exacerbated. So, and oftentimes it does not start with just talking about mental health or mental health issues. It actually starts with talking about mental health first aid and what that looks like, and has started and has been contextualized for a lot of different communities and populations over time, and how they're actually showing up to use that in their communities in present day, so that we're just not walking up to them and asking, we know mental health is an issue, like here's some resources and support and how we can help. A lot of people have been trying to figure out how to provide mental health first aid to their communities, to their populations for a very long time. And the enhancement by things like racism and prejudice and discrimination have only further incited this conversation. But people have still had need and have figured out how to fill those gaps historically. And so how do we really approach that with understanding and then inviting them to partner to really transform this thing? And so I'll probably just lend my 2 cents to that, but I'm sure, my panelists can also use better words to talk about other areas.
Briana, from a volunteer perspective, broadening that search.
Yes, forgive me. I was trying to get to the mute button. Yes, so we've actually had a lot of success with connecting with our partners in academia. I'm looking at Nathan, because what we find is when people have just to Deron's point, like the knowledge of what the issue area is, asking to serve in that area, that issue area is you kind of tend to have a higher yield of people willing to participate. So one strategy that Martha's Table uses is we have connected with all the area colleges in Washington, D.C. With either the student affairs office, the provost office, the registrar. We've shared, a list of days and times with all of our volunteer opportunities and asked that they include it in the listservs that are going out to the students, and that they even encourage staff and faculty to promote the opportunities in their classrooms. Many of our volunteer opportunities are around food access and food insecurity within Washington, D.C. And so we go to, for example, George Washington School of Public Health. That is an area where you have students actually studying that particular issue area. So there's a direct correlation with the work that we're doing and what they're studying and giving them that opportunity. So one thing I would recommend is, kind of looking at your area, community colleges and universities, and connecting with staff and faculty there and asking if they would kind of be an ambassador or an advocate on your behalf to share those volunteer opportunities.
Natasha, I believe you wanted to chime in here as well.
Sure. So I echo everything Deron has said. I will say for that question around mental health, again, I always go back to understanding the history and the analysis around particularly Black healing. One right that I'm very clear, under white supremacy, Black people do not have the right to heal. And so what does that mean in a historical context? I think that's important for your organization to begin to investigate and think about. Another resource is beam.community. Beam is an amazing self-care and healing organization. It stands for Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. And they are rooted in supporting Black folks. That includes queer, trans, non-binary individuals, and provides a wealth of free wellness tools. But I think most importantly, what they provide, in which my team has partnered with them on, is that they do a Black peer support training for anyone that is supporting Black communities, right? And so I'm in a training, not only with Black folks, but other people of color and white presenting people, to think about and talk about how do we triage going to that, mental health first aid. They have a beautiful system called Lapis, in which to help anyone in your community when they're having a mental health challenge at that time, to support them and how to do that. But they're also an excellent organization to talk with, to support. I know they're also in the DC area. They're a national organization, But and they also have a really great analysis on the health industrial complex. So to help you like analyze, okay, we want to do this, but how are we moving in a way that does not support, for example, in the Black community, Black healing, and the way that we are approaching, the way that we're talking about it, and also the historical, right? Pulling that knowledge from history and moving it forward, Sankofa, hashtag Sankofa, to understand, so how do we move differently, right? So I just want to offer that as some resources. And they also have a beautiful directory of healers, beautiful directory, national directory of healers.
Thank you, Natasha. I do see some links that others have shared in the chat. So please check out the chat if you haven't already. Or if you wouldn't mind, if you do have additional resources, putting it in the chat so others can benefit from your resource list. I believe I have question for time for one more question. And I'm just going to ask, is there ever a finish line to this work? And what measures success?
I'll quickly chime in. You know, it's about persistence, right? And there's not a finish line, right? There can never be a finish line because there's always going to be more we can do to help communities heal. You know, there's always going to be more to learn, more to know, and more to impact. So it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, right? And I would say, again, echo the importance of studying a history because success leaves clues, right? And, you know, we can learn to see more clearly. We can, as an organization or as leaders of organizations or just as individuals, any theory, philosophy, data that blinds you from seeing the truth is not kind to us, right? If we can't see discrepant conditions in schools, if we can't see racism, if we can't see the challenges in housing systems, or we can't see health inequity, then we have to broaden our perspective, change it. You know, we have to develop ways to see others and develop deep feelings for them. We have to hear their moans and groans, the moans and groans in our own history, years of slavery, of individuals not being allowed to read or vote. We have to come to terms with the truth of our own history. We have to feel uneasy. And then when you feel uneasy, you can start to develop your own voice as to what you want to do about those things. You can find your voice. And that's what we need to do, right? So I think from an organizational lens, I'll say it doesn't end. We've got a lot of work to do. Greatness has been reduced lately to your success and how much clout you have, how many clicks you get, how many images you are. I mean, that's just strutting like a peacock, right? Peacocks strut because they can't fly. I want us to fly as a society, as a culture, and I think that we can do that. But to your short answer of your question is, it's not about an end, it's about flying, because when you can fly, you can go anywhere and you can see new things. But we're doing a little bit too much strutting right now, and we're not going to get to the flying unless we do the kind of work that this session has been about.
Thank you. I know, Susan, I'm watching the time, so I'm just going to go to the panelists, and I'm going to ask for one word, phrase, one sentence to reflect on our discussion today. And I'm inviting all of the participants to please put down your word in the chat area as well. So I'm just going to go by order that I see you, Briana.
I'm just going to underscore what was just said. Let's continue to work supply.
My final thought would likely be, don't rest at just understanding. Move forward to being an ally and understanding what allyship really means.
Thank you, Nathan.
I'll just end with how I started, belonging, you know, really developing and being committed to instilling a sense of belonging in other people. And if you're an organizational leader or a volunteer, There are things that you can do, and probably things that you haven't thought about doing yet, to enrich belonging in your everyday strategies and behavior.
So, Natasha.
What's coming up for me is defining a new foundation, and really examining what that means for yourself and for your organization. It becomes very important. And I'm going to chime in. Another word that's coming up for me is humanity, of how can we create space where we're exploring our full humanity. White supremacy has cut off from that. So how do we open that back up?
Thank you. Susan, I am going to actually throw you a curveball and ask for your word. And you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I have so many things going on here. My word is chills, CHILLS, because I kept experiencing that as I listened to everybody. So many quotes scribbled down, going, oh, I'm going to use that next time. When somebody said, what's your favorite quote? I have so many new words to use, but I have chills that this is a program I imagined beginning last summer. And it's like, thank you. This is what I was looking for. So chills.
I'm just going to read a few off from the chat, and then I'll hand it back over to you. I see hopeful, empathy, patience, intention, patience, just a lot of the love, a lot of hopeful, curiosity, determination, persistence, be bold and courageous, joy, fly, humanity, self-examination. Thank you all so much, Susan, and thank you, the panel, all of the panelists, for your participation and your answers. Susan, I'm handing it back to you for the final wrap up.
So thank you to Laila, Natasha, Nathan, Deron, Briana, and my VF colleagues who have been working real hard behind the scenes. Holly, Jennifer, May-Jean, Sahara, Tina. At this point of the program, I was going to encourage you to make sure that you come and join us on Monday at our annual Give Together of Family Friendly Volunteering Day. It's full. We have 700 people signed up for our program hosted at Northern Virginia Community College on Monday. So sorry. However, if you're still searching for something to do special on your Monday, a great teaching opportunity for if you are a family with small children or you're intergenerational, I think the link will be shared in the chat area that you can just look around in your community, and that's nationwide. There is an evaluation to today, and we really hope that you will complete this. It really helps us tell our story when we are talking to the community on the impact this conversation has, as well as the rest of the activities through Monday. Finally, I always end this program with the same quote from Maya Angelou, because it's part of my journey and it's my inspiration, because we want to do well. So do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. We all have our work cut out for us. But thank you again for joining us today. I still have chills. Thanks again. Have a great Wednesday.